Hi, folks. Welcome to another of our devotions. We're going to be looking today again at Psalm 1, and we're going to complete our studies in this particular psalm. Just thinking back on what we've already seen, we've seen that this is a man who doesn't go with the flow. He doesn't walk in the way of the wicked. He doesn't stand in the way of sinners. He doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. Instead, he finds his pleasure in the law of the Lord, and he spends a considerable amount of time reading the word, meditating upon it, and he finds pleasure and delight in doing so. The psalmist goes on and he then draws us a picture of the sort of life that this person lives. And it's important to note that what he says in verses 3 and following flows out of and is a direct result of what he has said in verse 1 and 2. In other words, the man who rejects the way of the world, the man who delights in the law of the Lord and meditates on it, is the man who, the psalmist says, is like a tree planted by the river of water, which brings forth fruit in its season. His leaf doesn't wither, and all he does prospers. He draws a picture for us, and of course that's what poetry is. It's drawing pictures. He speaks about a tree being planted by a river of water. Let's think about that. This tree is planted, firmly rooted in the ground. It speaks of stability, that word planted. In other words, it's not just superficially set there, it is deep rooted. And then he says that it's planted by streams of water. So planted signifies stability. And then you have the streams of water. And the streams of water, of course, provide the tree with that water that it needs in order for the tree to live. So the streams of water point to vitality. It's a living tree. It's not dead. It has life in it. And that is evidently seen in that the tree bears fruit. In other words, there's productivity as well. It produces what it's meant to produce. Obviously, it's a fruit bearing tree, whatever the nature of the tree happens to be, whether it's a fig tree or whatever. It is producing what it's meant to produce. And this is so important, of course, in the Christian life. We are to be stable in our lives as Christians, stable in what we believe, stable in what we are committed to. We are to be alive. We are to be being fed by the streams of water. Streams of water are also a picture, of course, of the Word of God. And that is to produce fruit in our lives. You remember the words of Jesus. A good tree bears good fruit. A bad tree, bad fruit. If a tree doesn't bear fruit, it's cut down, it's thrown in the fire. This man, in this psalm, this godly man who doesn't walk in the way of sinners, who doesn't stand in the way of the wicked, who doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful, and who delights in the law of the Lord, this man is like this tree. Not only is it a tree that bears fruit, speaking of productivity, it's a tree that does not wither. That is durability, season after season. Every time the fruit is meant to be produced, it's there. It's a picture of a person who begins to produce fruit early in their Christian life, keeps on producing fruit throughout their Christian life, and even in old age they bear fruit. You remember Psalm 92, where it speaks about even in old age they will be growing fat and full of sap, a picture again of productivity. But then there's another statement that the psalmist makes, and he says, and all he does prospers. The blessing of God is upon this man. God blesses him in his life. The psalmist goes on, all he does shall profit. The wicked, here's the contrast. The wicked, they're not like that. They're like chaff that the wind drives away. In the ancient Near East, whenever they got the grain in, they would have thrown the grain up in the air after it had been rolled, and the chaff, the outer husk, would have been blown away by the wind. And the psalmist likens the wicked to the chaff, blown away, no substance. And he goes on, To elaborate even further, he says that the wicked will not stand in the judgment. In other words, when they come before God in judgment, they'll not be able to stand before God in the sense of being innocent. They will stand before him as those who are guilty. Not so the wicked, however, or not so the righteous, I should say, however. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. This is a lovely psalm that we've been thinking about, and it encourages us right at the very beginning of the book of Psalms to realise there are two ways in which to live: the way of the godly or the way of the wicked. If we are to live the life of the godly, then we are to be godly people. We can only be godly people united to Christ, given his righteousness and having his Spirit dwelling within us. And by the power of that Spirit, we can indeed not walk in the way of the wicked, not stand in the way of sinners, not sit in the seat of the scornful. We can delight ourselves in that word of God, which is like the streams of water feeding the tree that's planted and that produces fruit. That tree that never withers, and all that this man does, being described by this tree in his life, he prospers. And the most important thing, of course, is that when it comes to the day of judgment, clothed in the righteousness of Christ, we will be able to stand guiltless before God. Lovely psalm with which to begin our studies, and God willing, we'll move on to psalm number 2 in our next study. Have a great day, folks. Every blessing.